So that's some nice bird song in your picture.
And we're live.
That's lovely. That's blackbirds, isn't it?
I'll take that. Honestly, birds are not my source of it.
Yeah.
We should probably talk about science, though, or science fiction.
Yeah.
Not that birds aren't science, I suppose.
I'm very near the end of Children of Time at the moment. I apologise for not reading it when everybody else did. I'm always behind the curve, but I'm enjoying it tremendously.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
I'm really enjoying it. I'm sorry, I just didn't read it when it came. Yeah, it's very good. Really good stuff. Very well up my street.
Yeah. And hello, everyone. I guess.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Adrian Tchaikovsky. Best known for writing the Spiders in Outer Space, Children of Time. Al?
Hello there. Hi, everyone. Hello, Adrian, as well. I'm Al Reynolds, long-time science fiction writer, former space scientist. I suppose my main thing has been books in the Revelation space universe, but more recently I've done a trilogy of books about far future space pirates, which started with Revenger.
Okay, and you have questions. I have an even dozen questions already. Good Lord, I'm going to get through all of these.
I'm going to
you can ask questions via the ask a question thing. To give it its technical name. You can also vote on questions. So I think we're going to take them in the vote order.
Oh, I see. Yes, I got the votes there. Yeah.
So if you want, if you want to hear the answer to a particular question, sling your vote to it, and hopefully we'll get to it. Shall I kick off with the first one, Al?
Let's do it. Let's go.
I feel like I'm on a radio show. So the first one from Graham R. is, do you think you need to understand science to write science fiction?
It's my grandfather clock going off at 7 o'clock. It'll do that in an hour as well. Well, I don't know how you feel about Adrian, but I think it helps to have an interest in science, which I think is sort of a good thing generally in sort of well-rounded individuals. But certainly, no, you said you don't need to. What was it? You
understand science.
No, you don't need to understand it. You just need to be driven by it, to be inspired by it. I think. I mean, I used to think that you needed a qualification in science to be a science fiction writer, because the writers that I latched onto early in my reading were all people like Asimov and Clarke and people who had a sort of background in science, and I mistakenly thought that was the sort of entry qualification for becoming a science fiction writer, which is complete rubbish. But certainly not. No.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think a lot depends on the sort of science fiction you're writing, because there is a particular breed of very sciencey science fiction, and if you launched into that kind of book, a kind of a Greg Egan style book, maybe without a solid grounding in the science you were using, the key thing is, I guess, there's a chunk of your readers for whom you kill the immersion, because they would understand that this doesn't work in that way. And so I think it's probably advisable to understand a certain amount of the science if it's a book which rests on the science. For example, I don't think I'd recommend going after a Children of Time style book if you didn't understand a certain amount of the biology behind the species you were using. And also, the book's probably going to be less engaging because you've got less material to work with at that point, in the same way that, if you want to write a book about people, you would want to do it with a knowledge of how people in those sort of positions have actually behaved. But I think it's very dependent on the topic and the particular subsection of science fiction you're going for.
It also depends on how deep you go into the actual understanding, because you can write a very credible piece of science with I would say an extremely a layman's overview of a particular scientific subject, but at the other extreme, as Adrian says, you have the sort of the Greg Egan approach, where it's almost science fiction as a way of exploring genuinely new scientific ideas. A lot of science fiction plays with scientific ideas, but it doesn't sort of innovate beyond them. It just finds sort of interesting little niches and curlicues within what we know. But then there is that, a fairly niche part of science fiction where it's a kind of thought experiment where you're actually trying to push beyond what we know, and that you really have to be on your game to do that kind of stuff well. You have to know the current state of play of that area of science, and also have sufficient confidence in your understanding to sort of spring beyond it. That does take some doing, and it does not necessarily. I mean, it sort of selects a certain readership as well who are prepared to go along for the ride with that kind of thing.
I mean, one thing I've certainly found is there are certainly areas of science I'm not remotely educated in, but people who are educated in them are usually only too happy to give you the benefit of their expert knowledge and discuss things inordinate length with you. So if you did want to write something and there was an area of science you felt unsure of, putting out feelers to academics or anyone in your sort of social contacts, in my experience, I generally find that someone knows someone who has the relevant expertise. Yes,
I've done that as well. I've got tapped different people. So I have a background in space science, but that doesn't mean I know all about every single detail about space science. There's things that even I'm sort of on shaky ground with, and I'll maybe contact a colleague and say, is this really stupid, or could I just about get away with it if I fudge some numbers? And I mean, I'm sort of doing that right now with a bit of the book I'm writing, where I've sort of written myself into a really preposterous plot development, but it's so fun that I want to sort of follow it through to its bitter end.
Well, that kind of follows into the next question, actually. So the next voted question, which is Stephen H's. Shall I just? I'll just read the questions. Shall I just?
Yeah. Okay.
Because the next one's specifically for you, so it would be a bit weird if I love the intricate, hard science details both you put into your books, but it must put limits on where you can take a story. How do you balance world building with storytelling?
Yeah, I mean that's always a trade-off that needs to be negotiated. I think within science fiction. That my broad rule of thumb is that storytelling has precedence over strict scientific verisimilitude, and I'm always very pleased if I can say that word without stumbling over it. If I have to break the science to tell a really good story, I will do so, because I would rather that story existed in the world. If the science impacts on the story in such a way that it sort of undermines the narrative, then to a degree I will bend the science, but I'll try and do it intelligently, and I'll try and play fair with the reader. I'll try and sort of indicate to them where we depart from the sort of accepted science,
I mean, it's very relevant to this question that the series I'm currently working on, which is somewhat of a less scientifically rigorous one than the Children of books, I have decided I am going to have anti-gravity and I'm going to have faster than light travel, and I don't care that neither of those things are probably in any way possible in the real universe, because they are really convenient to tell a story. And in Children of Ruin, my character spent an awful lot of time going backwards and forwards just within a solar system, because that's the level of their technology, and I was being conscientious about the science. But now I'm doing a new universe, and in this universe you can go faster than light, and to hell with it.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, I've written tons of stuff where they don't go faster than light, and it's people sort of take it as a given that I wouldn't ever do, a sort of big sort of standard space opera with hyperdrives and things. But I kind of love to, actually, because I think it opens up. I mean, whatever narrative decisions you make in your world building, it always sort of closes off certain story possibilities and opens up others. And one of the things I always loved about the Star Wars universe, which does have this sort of capability where they can sort of travel anywhere in the universe, before lunchtime, is that you really do get a sense of a teeming, complex future society, and that's very, very much at odds with the type of science fiction I've tended to write, where everything's sort of spread out and vast and ancient, and it takes forever to get anywhere. You can't tell a swashbuckling space opera within that framework. So yeah, I'm also attracted by the possibilities of made-up science. But even physicists are not 100% settled on this. They still. You remember when there was that experiment with the Gran Sasso neutrino detector about 10 years ago, and they thought that neutrinos were arriving slightly ahead of time. Therefore, they were traveling superluminally. And that all turned out to be sort of a fault in the engineering setup of the experiment. But, within a few days of that, there were people sort of putting up preprints on archive that was sort of, we think we can accommodate this within the general relativistic framework now. Oh, right, so fast night travel is okay all of a sudden. So it's still slightly up for grabs, I would say. So go to it, have your anti-gravity and your fast night drives. Have fun.
Yeah. So the next one we have, Brian Stewart is asking you specifically, do you have any interest in continuing to explore more stories from House of Suns?
Oh, hello, Brian. Well, I think with these questions that are directed to us individually, Adrian, we'll try and farm them out so that we get it's equally between us. I've never really abandoned the House of Suns universe. I've dipped back into it. About 3 years ago, I wrote a story called Belladonna Nights, which was my way of rebooting the sort of terms by which that universe operates, partly to enable myself at some point to write another story, and perhaps a longer story within that framework, but also just to sort of plant a flag and say, hey, I'm not entirely done with this. And I do that every now and again with other properties, universes within my books. So I'm rarely ever done with something. So certainly, I really enjoy the House of Suns universe. But just when I want to write a story, doesn't necessarily mean that I've come up with the right one to fit the scope of the story. But I'd like to at some point. Yes. Thank you for the first question. Shall I take one in now?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So I think this one is directed at you. Yeah. AT. Oh, it's both of us. Okay. Well, it's from Joel Self. Hello, Joel. AT. That's to Adrian. Why spiders and octopuses? And then a question for me about Love, Death and Robots. Why spiders and octopuses?
Yeah, I used to have this very complex and very, very literati sounding answer about this, about using insects and spiders as aspects of human nature and metamorphosis and Pelevin's life of insects and all that sort of thing. And that was just to cover up the fact that I really, really like spiders and octopuses and insects and all of the other things that people don't like. Basically, that was how I dealt with being something of a social outcast when I was a kid. Basically, I decided that this was my tribe, and I would have a huge amount, and still do have a huge amount of sort of sympathy and love for all those sort of things. But what this also means, as a kind of a serendipitous side effect, is if you wanted to write a book about empathy with the other and you want to do something from Earth, there is literally nothing on Earth that you can use that people will have more difficulty feeling empathic with than a spider. And that's, bizarrely and counterintuitive, I think that's why Children of Time has worked so well with so many people, because it does stretch the mental frame in that way, because people really hate spiders. More than anything else in the world, people hate spiders.
And you don't flinch from the sort of, the aspects of spiderhood that we might find off-putting are front and center in your stories, aren't they? You don't sort of cozy them up in any way. There's like carcasses of dead mice lying around, that kind of thing. Various sort of horrible methods of killing other spiders.
And hopefully, there are now hopefully a small number fewer people who hate spiders than there were before they read the book. So, if I save a few spiders along the way, that's definitely sort of part of the mission statement.
Yeah, I quite like spiders. I can't bring myself to kill one if I find one in the house. They've always got to go into a glass beaker and be transported outside.
And then, Love, Death and Robots, which I've actually recently watched and really enjoyed the whole series.
Oh, good. Yeah. That to date, that's the only two of mine that have been adapted. They're doing the second series, and I don't have anything in the second series, but it will be interesting to watch and see what happens. It was one of those things where they approach you for the rights to adapt a couple of stories, and then nothing happens for 2 or 3 years. You don't really hear anything, I didn't have any creative input into the whole thing, so I was rather glad that I liked the finished products. I liked both of the animations, but I was particularly, I mean, on a personal level, Zima Blue is one of my favourite stories of mine. So I really loved the way it was handled in that animation. So I was very, 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 very happy with it. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that question.
Okay, so I've got the next one is from Brian Stewart again. So I'd love to hear from both of you about your favorite sci-fi movies as of late, especially considering we have some exciting ones like Tenet and Dune coming out this year.
Oh yeah.
And then there's a second part to that which we'll get onto. But what have you liked recently?
Well, I'm always kind of behind the curve on science fiction films. I mean, I'm a hard sell. And I think I'm slightly hypocritical about this because I think a lot of the films that I really love, they slipped under my critical radar because I was of an age where I just took them on their own terms. So I like films like Fantastic Voyage and Silent Running and the 1960 version of The Time Machine, which most people don't like, but I really like it. And then I like the original Star Wars, kind of cool on the prequels, and kind of like just not that bothered about the new ones. I mean, I don't dislike them, but they didn't really do it for me on any other level. I did like trying to think of something I've really enjoyed recently. It's a tough one.
Did you see Arrival?
Yeah, I did like Arrival.
I think that's my top sci-fi film.
I liked it more than Blade Runner, the sequel he did. I didn't dislike Blade Runner, but it didn't leave me strongly motivated to watch it a second time. But yeah, I thought Arrival was good. Actually, a film that I've come back to, and the first time I watched it, I was totally unimpressed with it, or nonplussed, was Edge of Tomorrow. Every time I watch it, I just end up enjoying it a bit more. So I think I've watched it 3 times now, and the last time I thought it was actually worth buying the Blu-ray because I'd got more out of it. So that's probably the most recent big science fiction film that is a keeper for me. One that
I think it's a criminally I think it performed very poorly, and it's criminally underrated. I did get to see it in the cinema when it came out. And I was really, and the other one that really blew my socks off was Ex Machina.
Oh yeah, I enjoyed that. Yeah.
Well, I guess we're probably deviating from the recent with some of these, but
yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I'm just struggling. I don't get to the cinema all that much. I don't necessarily rush out to see science fiction films. I think it's because I've been writing science fiction all day. I'd sooner go and see a cop film or something like that, or a western, or a war film. So I may be self-selecting away from actually seeing science fiction films. I often wait till they come out on DVD. But I'm looking forward to Dune. I think that'll be.
Well, Villeneuve is one of the directors I really, really like. I mean, I did really enjoy the Blade Runner sequel, which I thought was a very tough gig to give to someone. I thought he actually pulled it off, which I wasn't kind of putting money on. So, bonus question: if you could wave a wand and get any director to adapt, all right, that question just vanished. But any director to adapt any story of yours, which would it be?
Well, this is the thing where you poison your chances of ever working with a certain director, don't you, when you say things like this? I mean, way back in the early 2000s, I was a big fan of the French duo of Juanet and Caro. I think they did City of Lost Children, Delicatessen. And I think they had they sort of went their separate ways to some degree, and then one of them did Amelie, which I really like. But they had a certain science fiction, fantasy, steampunk aesthetic that was running through a lot of their earlier films. And I always thought they'd be real natural fits for doing, particularly my Revelation Space books. The sort of gothic, grimy atmosphere of those books would suit those directors particularly well. But I don't really know what either of them are doing these days.
Well, I mean, it's a magic wand. They can be doing whatever you want with a magic wand. I mean, for me, Children of Time has been discussed for filming a bit, and the rights have kind of come and gone. And it's one of those things that there's often someone asking about it. It will be a tough call to make a straight up film of it, purely because you have large sections that are entirely without human beings, and the things that are not human beings are also not, say, cute robots or things like Wall-E or anything like that. Honestly, I'd really like to see something made of Dogs of War. It's still my favorite of my own books, and I think it would be really rather cinematic to be made. But as to which director, I'm not enough of a film buff, honestly, to start juggling directors, I think.
No, I'm not speaking from any position of authority when it comes to film and directors either. Sort of bow to other people in that regard. Yeah, we live and dream, don't we, Adrian?
So, do you think about some kind of collaboration, like Children of Ruin meets Pushing Ice?
Well, we haven't really talked about that before, that's for sure. I'm open to any collaborations, but they're like herding cats. I mean, they're writers I've known for sort of getting on for 30 years, where we sort of, hey, we should do something together one day. Hey, let's get the band back together. And these things, all the stars have to align before collaborations are workable.
I think I'm kind of idiosyncratic enough that the sort of collaborations I've done in the past have been very much parceling up something ahead of time, and then everyone goes off and does their own bit with minimal interaction. I honestly don't know how well I play with other people. There is actually something I'm kicking around, not with Al, but with a couple of other writers that may come into fruition in the next few months, and I guess we'll see then whether I can kind of work in harness rather than just getting off on my own.
I mean, I've not had that much experience. I did a short story or a novella with Liz Williams, who's a wonderful writer. We kind of like did that thing of, well, I'll write 500 words and then you write 500 words, and we kind of battered it back and forwards. But it wasn't me sort of looking over Liz's shoulder while she's sort of typing. Well, why are you doing that? And the thing I did with my friend Stephen Baxter was even more of an extreme case of that, because we divided the book up structurally over coffee at the London World Cup, and more or less went off then. And Steve had a window in his schedule where he could write substantial portions of the book. I didn't, and then by the time my window opened, he'd done his bits to a large degree. So it was sort of, it was written in sort of parallel, but certainly not, not the usual thing of, close collaboration on that level. We did close collaboration once we'd written it, because then we sort of composited the whole thing into a single document, and then we were able to mail that back and forwards between us. But that's really the extent of my sort of experience with collaboration. It's a definite tradition within science fiction, maybe more so than in other genres. And you sometimes even get like three-way collaborations as well. There's some good stories that come out of collaborations, so it shouldn't be dismissed.
Okay.
Right, next
so,
one.
Yeah, do you want to do the next one?
So are we waiting for the ones that get a box around them? Are they the ones that get upvoted?
I don't know. I assumed that I'd been clicking on them and putting a box around them, but I think
maybe
that's
okay.
I think that's entirely a pathetic fallacy on my part.
Okay, so the one that I'm seeing, one that's got 4 votes. That seems to be the most upvoted at the moment.
Okay, well, I better ask that, because that's to you.
That's from Harry Edwards, yeah.
So, Al, what is your belief about the Fermi paradox? I think it's our moderators putting the box. What is your belief about the Fermi paradox? And do you believe something like the inhibitors could really be true? And just on the off chance, do you want to do a quick note about what the Fermi paradox is, in case anyone isn't sure?
So the Fermi paradox is one of those. It's a real proposition or conundrum within science and our understanding of our place in the universe. And the idea was formulated by Enrico Fermi in I believe, the 1940s or early 1950s. The idea is that if you look out into the universe and you sort of take stock of the number of stars and planets that must be out there, and then you think about the mechanics of traveling from star to star, then it's natural to ask, where is everybody? Why aren't we seeing aliens all around the place? Because there should be lots of aliens by now, because the galaxy is quite old. And there's lots and lots of opportunities for life to form out there in the universe. So the Fermi paradox is a sort of a question that says, how do we resolve the apparent absence of alien life from our observations? And there are many ways of coming at it. One approach is just to say that life is not nowhere near as abundant as it might appear to be, and that's a very valid position. It could be that Earth-like planets are actually rather rare in the galaxy, in the wider universe. I must admit, when I started writing Revelation Space, and I wrote it a long time ago, I might have heard of the Fermi paradox, but it certainly wasn't anything that I was thinking about cogently. I was just putting together lots of space opera tropes and bringing lots of aliens into the book, and not really thinking about how it sort of all fitted together logically. And it was only quite late in the gestation of that book that I read a whacking great tome called The Anthropic Cosmological Principle, which is full of stuff like this. And it forced me to think about what I was saying about the role of life in the universe. And then I sort of worked my way around to the idea that there had to be something out there that was culling intelligent civilizations before they had a chance to spread into the galaxy. So that's why I introduced this idea of the inhibitors into my books, which is, it's by no means an original idea. And I think my sort of take on it maybe has some original touches.
I think it is one of the kind of standard Fermi paradox answers is maybe we don't see them because something destroys them as soon as they make themselves known.
Yeah, it goes back. I mean, within science fiction terms, it goes back at least to Fred Saberhagen and I think the 1940s with his Berserker books. And then in the sort of 60s and 70s and into the 80s, there's a whole slew of really great books by Gregory Benford in particular, which really look at the sort of the big philosophical themes of life in the universe and propagation of intelligent life throughout the galaxy. So I was definitely writing from a standpoint of other writers who've done a lot of really brilliant groundwork before I came along. Thank you for that question.
Okay, do you want to take the next
Yes, one? Yeah. So this is from Brett Windnagel. Hello, Brett. If you plot or outline your novels, how extensive is it, and how has the process changed over the years?
Shall I kick off?
Yeah, kick off, Adrian.
I mean, I plot things to death, frankly. The only thing I don't plot with most of my books is the outcome of the very last scene, which I tend to leave up to the momentum of the book to that point. But everything else gets plotted. I'll plot chapter by chapter and then scene by scene, and sometimes even point by point of a conversation if I know I need to get a certain complex amount of information over, and I need to make sure I order it properly. Over the years, that probably hasn't changed a great deal. I guess I've got a bit more fluid over it, and I've got a bit less stressy about going off piste and altering the plan on the fly, which is a thing I suspect most writers tend to have to do to a certain extent. But yeah, no, I don't tend to embark on anything longer than a short story unless I've got a fairly solid plan of how it's going to pan out.
What format does this plan take? Is it an actual document that's sort of sitting on your computer, or is it Post-it notes?
Yes, no, it's usually a bullet pointed Word document, basically. Okay. Just numbers and chapter. This will happen. This will happen. This will happen.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, I'm speaking from myself. At one point I wrote a 30,000 word synopsis for a novel, so it was like about 1/6 of the work of actually writing a novel.
Wow.
And it was bloody useless. I realised that for me, plot problems are kind of fractal. They're buried down in the details. And I thought, I still managed to trip myself up, even though I'd done this chapter, but it was like really very detailed chapter notes about character beats and how I wanted the story to move on. But it didn't make the process of writing the book any more fluid. I still found myself constantly running into situations where I still had to think through the plot problems, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I left myself lots of trapdoors and pitfalls within that synopsis. So I'm reluctantly, because I'd far rather go into a novel with the confidence that I had the structure and the story mapped down. But I do tend now to just start writing with a sort of very sketchy sense of where I'm heading. I've tried all different methods, and I've yet to find the one that works reliably for me.
So I've just seen a comment down there. Adrian smells like he's forced to.
I saw that as well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, my sort of big writing, top secret writing secret gadget is a whiteboard. Because when I was used to be a scientist, we always had offices with enormous whiteboards and loads of coloured markers, and I got very used to sort of sketching out bullet points and ideas and loopy diagrams with loads of arrows on whiteboards. And I've just transferred that over into my writing methodology, and I did go and buy the biggest possible whiteboard I could get. It's about 8 foot by 4 foot. Dominates my office, but I can sketch out, I can do structural blocking of a novel there, and it's a kind of circuit diagram that I mutate and move around as I'm going into the story. But I do try and put, like, make sure you do this in chapter 12, sort of reminders to myself in there. But that's about as close as I get to having a document that guides me. It's a really interesting thing, I think, the way writers approach novels.
My work was for a particularly complicated skirmish in the Shadows of the Outbooks. I bought a load of rubber insects and arranged them on the table and just sort of moved them around until I worked out who was fighting who with what and how the sort of flow of the combat moved.
I've made like cardboard models of stars, to try and work out where they are in 3-dimensional space, and that kind of thing, and endless doodling. Yeah. I mean, would it be fair to say that having come from a fantasy background, do you think that gave you a more sort of, I don't know, a sort of military tactical approach to plotting, that because you're dealing with large movements of armies and that kind of stuff, that sort of carried over into science fiction, or is that a gross generalization?
I think it's just how my mind works, to be honest. I think I need the scaffolding there, and the dividend it pays out is my first draft tends to be fairly similar to the draft I submit because I planned it out. I don't have to go back and rewrite things and foreshadow things and things like that. That was the phone. Not okay. That was my phone briefly going and then deciding not to.
I mean, the sort of downside of my sort of approach to writing is I write a lot of garbage, if you look for what you want a better word. I overwrite, I overproduce, and a lot of stuff ends up not being used. It just gets moved into sort of the cuttings file, and with the best will in the world, most of it's never ever found its way into any other text. But it just seems to be, I mean, as I don't really like it as a methodology, but it's the only one that really works for me so far. Should we take another question?
Yeah. So Roland asks, as science fiction this is the big question. Yeah. As science fiction authors looking towards and writing about the future, how do the upheavals of today, global pandemics, racial strife, etc., influence your thought process and creative mindsets?
Very good question. Hi, Roland. Adrian and I were talking to a degree a little bit about this before we went live, because we were sort of discussing how we've functioned as writers during the lockdown. And I think everyone will have their own experience of it. Just to take the specifics of COVID-19 and the lockdown, I think we would both agree on this, that as a subset of workers, writers have not been tremendously affected by it because our day-to-day lives more or less resembled lockdown anyway. Sort of, as farcical as it seems, or as that is pretty much the case. It's a lot of just not going out and not seeing anyone, and that is sort of like the how you get novels written. So it was an easy transition into lockdown for me, and I've actually been almost embarrassingly productive. Actually, I've done 100,000 words over lockdown because there just haven't been any other distractions. It's the normal stuff has fallen away. I'll throw it over to Adrian in a minute. But I remember, in terms of the sort of larger picture of global strife, I remember on 9/11, which is fading into history now, but it was a really traumatic day. And I came home from work early because they'd sent us home from the European Space Agency because no one could work after the events began to unfold. And I made a conscious decision that I was going to go and write that evening. I was just going to carry on and do 2,000 words because I wanted to assert some normality into my life, and damn the forces that were trying to denormalize and destabilize things. So, to a degree, that's how I function as a writer. I've always just kind of force myself to keep going, if necessary, go down a gear, but just really grind down and just keep moving. Adrian?
That's actually a very, I mean, I'm going to go off at a bit of a tangent here, but that's a very interesting thought. So 9/11 had a colossal cultural impact, but I think it had a colossal cultural, very readily graspable impact because it is very narratively understandable. It was an attack, it was a human agency, it was a discrete event. There's even a potent visual symbol as you see the skyline of New York in a film with the two towers. That is dating the film. The COVID-19 pandemic is very different because it's slow and it's not caused by a human agency, and it's literally caused by things that are too small to see. There is no great symbol. Even mask wearing was something that existed for other purposes beforehand, and so it effectively it lacks the instant narrative hook for people to react to it. And I think one of the reasons that reaction to it and precautions against it have been so varied is it's much more difficult to get your head around the scale of what's going on, despite the fact, of course, it's killed considerably more people than died in 9/11.
It's also not playing out in a sort of narratively satisfying way, is it? Because we also don't know how close we are to the end game. It could be, I mean, realistically, it could carry on for years. We could be in for a series of lockdowns, spikes, lockdown, spike, lockdown, and social norms may never return to the way they were before the virus. That's not how it happens in films.
No.
But yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm to some degree, I've got narrative. The momentum of a writer has carried me through the last 3 months. How I would function if you told me this, okay, it's like this forever, that would be different. I think that would be a very, very difficult thing to adjust to. But Adrian's absolutely right. 9/11 was a very distinct event that felt very different to the way COVID-19 has played out.
So next up, another one from Joel Self. What is something that will, I like this one. What is something that will likely happen in the near future, say within the next 500 years? Blimey, I don't know how long Joel Self is going to live, but that's quite a long near future. So that you're really disappointed you won't live to see.
Oh, this is a tough one. Well, I'll just take, I'm a child of the 60s, and I grew up watching Thunderbirds. It really dates me. And in Thunderbirds, they don't actually put a man on Mars until the year 2065. And then it goes horribly wrong. Because it's Thunderbirds. But as a child, I thought, well, that's just ludicrously pessimistic, because we're only just coming out of the Apollo era. We'll definitely go back to Mars by the end of the 20th century. Don't go to Mars by the end of the 20th century. We'll probably have moon bases and space stations and all that sort of Asimovian, Kubrickian stuff by then. And then it sort of got put. Okay, we'll go to Mars by 2020 for sure, definite. That's definitely happening. But now I'm like, I don't even think it's going to happen in my lifetime. Now it's just always 20 years away. And
I mean, 2065 is looking realistic.
I think that's looking really realistic. Yeah, it's going to be Thunderbirds our go. And then Captain Scarlet goes on the next mission, and he accidentally triggers war with the Mystrons. That's going to be really bad. But I don't think I'm going to live to see a significant human presence in space in my lifetime, and I wouldn't even bet serious money on boots back on the moon. I mean, I know they're talking about 2024, but so much could happen between now and then. Again, I've lived through far too many cycles of being told we're going back to the moon that never ever come to anything. So that's probably a disappointment for me. But hey, there's other stuff going on.
I'll go to the next, almost like the next stop. So for me, it's got to be a toss-up between going to an actual exoplanet and finding actual alien life. I mean, this is the biologist in me talking. Or it's going to be actually confronting some sort of non-human intelligence. Now, whether that is an uplift or whether that is an alien or whether that is an AI, I suspect that within the next century we'll have it. And basically, if AI that is a genuine intelligence is possible, then we will probably do it. And unfortunately, the depressing thought is probably it's not really possible, and probably computers can never be what we want them to be in that line. But God knows people are trying. And yeah, I mean, I think that is something that's going to happen in some way, that we will actually look into the, well, eyes or whatever it has instead of eyes of something that can think, but that is not us. And it does, I mean, barring them visiting us in the very near future, I'm not going to be around to see it.
I mean, just to pick up on what you were saying about exoplanets, that's also something that I kind of hope I might live to see an image of an exoplanet that's like more than 1 pixel. Something that maybe shows, if there's Earth-like planets with oceans and land masses and ice caps out there within the range that we could begin to image those features using our telescopic capabilities within the next decade or so. That would be amazing. And I think that would be a real spur to further innovation and development then, because if we knew that there was a potentially interesting world within, say, 20 light years or something like that, then it would be a real motivator to actually think about how we get there with robotic probes or even crewed exploration at some point in the future. But that would be very much, even if we did it now, there's no way I'm going to see a robot land on Alpha Centauri in my lifetime. It's just not going to happen. So I think interstellar exploration is something for the very distant future now, if at all.
Okay, I can see one with 8 votes. It's not ordering them properly at the moment. Or maybe, hold on, if I redo it, does it? No. Up and coming authors you want to recommend?
None.
By Dirk.
Competition. Get rid of them. I'm terrible. I'm awful at recommending up and coming authors. There are some fantastic new writers around, and I always blank when I'm very good at recommending my friends, and so I don't know. No, terrible admission from a writer. Go and buy the year's best science fiction by any anthologist, or the year's best fantasy and horror, and you'll see lots of fantastic new writers appearing in the magazines and online, and some of them may take your fancy, some of them they won't. And just find your way to the new voices. Science fiction is constantly innovating and turning over and welcoming new voices into its matrix.
I mean, I usually have a list of up-and-coming writers, and then by the time I actually get asked the question, they've been in the business for about 4 or 5 years and are fairly well
Adrian
known.
Tchaikovsky guy, I met him once. He was good. Yeah.
I still feel like an up-and-coming writer, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, that's me too. Yeah, I do as well. And I was kept. What, you mean I'm not one? What?
I mean, Temi O is one actually. That's
excellent, right?
Because I think her second book is coming out fairly soon. Premi Mohammed, I really enjoyed Beneath the Rising, her first book. So there's a couple.
Good, excellent. Yeah, Temi is her first novel was Do You Dream of Terror 2, which was a sort of classical science fiction staple about the first generation starship to leave the solar system, or a very long duration interstellar expedition, which doesn't go as planned. But I understand. I mean, her background is neuroscience, I think, and I think her next novel is going to be something that's much more sort of grounded in that discipline, as far as I understand it. So very much a writer to look out for.
Okay. Do you want to read there's a musicians one at 5. Do you want
to? Okay. Let's have a look. This is me leaning in. Okay. Musicians often talk about their greatest songs seeming to write themselves. Have you two experienced anything similar in your writing? Do you feel as if your best books have just spilled out of you? And that was from Stephen Adams. Hello, Steve. I mean, I wish it happened. It doesn't happen very often, but once or twice I've written something that has felt, oh God, I've made all my windows go weird. Every now and again, I've written a short story that sort of wrote itself. I mean, the best one for me was way back. I did a story for Interzone in the mid-90s called A Spy in Europa. And it was really, I started it on a Friday night. I wrote the ending. Then over Saturday and Sunday, I worked my way back from the ending to the beginning, sent it off. They bought it, and it's been reprinted quite a few times, and it did quite well for me. But majority of them are just a bloody slog. They just take weeks and weeks, and that's writing. The only novel I've had that sort of more or less, I mean, I'm in danger of romanticizing this now, past. But I remember House of Suns being quite an effortless, as effortless as anything that takes about 8 or 9 months can be. It was a relatively painless write for me. That book, it more or less wrote itself. What about you, Adrian?
Well, so my writing process starts with the setting creation, and because frankly that's the part of the whole business I'm actually most concerned with, and the stories and the characters generally arise quite organically out of the setting and the natural kind of friction points and fissures within what I've created. So to a certain extent, it does kind of write itself in that sense. Usually up until about chapter 5, when it becomes a bit of an uphill slog, and then for the last sort of 6 or 7 chapters, it tends to be quite a just a final attack run at the last chapter. Middles are a bugger, but middles are problematic. But in general, a lot of the thrust does come out of the word work I did in the setting itself.
There was I heard Philip on the radio a few months ago about this. Somebody said, how do you write first lines, and how do you ever, what process goes into writing the killer end line? First lines and the end lines well, it's page 58 and I try to sometimes write all sort of with us. Was about the warlord in 30,000 words. And for me, that's very much the case. They start a novel with high adrenaline, the rush of the new adventure going into the story, blank canvas, exciting, and then around about 30,000, that taking off, and the sort of stuff that's been problematic starts still building up, and then the wheels fall off, and I think not be too sort of smart about it. I think what separates sort of productive writers from wannabes, if you want to put it like that, is that real writers just sort of go through that wall. They just slog their way through it because they know it's part of the inevitable process of writing. Is that you hit that horrible block and you just have to force your way through it. And exactly like what you were saying, Adrian. The last 6 or 7 chapters of books. I mean, I just go into hyperdrive, and my capacity to write goes up. I'm able to write more and more a day as I get nearer the end of the book. So I'm doing sort of 5,000, 6,000 word days, and then wouldn't be unusual for me to write 8,000 or 9,000 words as I'm in the last week or two of a novel. And it's because you can see the finish line. You can sort of dip into those reserves of strength that you've got there, and stamina, but also because you're not multiplying plot lines at that point. You're sort of closing down the story. You're trying to bring it to a culmination. So it feels like you've sort of reached an apex of the story. I always feel about 2/3 of the way through the novel, and then it sort of becomes a sort of downhill sprint. But yeah, so it's rarely effortless, but once every now and again, bits of it are effortless. I would say, for me anyway.
Okay, so we've got about 12 minutes, so we're going to have a few of these. Do you want to scroll down and see and grab one that takes your fancy?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. There's a question here because it's flattering to us, so I'm going to pick this one up. Both of you have strong female characters. Is that a conscious choice? That's from Fabienne Panier. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, Fabienne. Do you want to take that one, Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you. It is certainly something I try to have I mean, strong female character is a bit of can be almost a bit of a problematic term in depending on what is meant by. But I certainly try to have many and varied female characters and a diverse cast in my books in general. And it is a conscious choice, because I'm very aware that if I simply coasted, then I suspect all of my characters would be white men, and they would be quite like me. They would be middle class. They'd have a beard. And because that's how because most of our media is set up that that's what a hero looks like, and therefore that's basically the path of least resistance in storytelling. So for me, I also find it makes stories more interesting. It means I'm going over a less traveled path, because the majority of stories, or a lot of stories, will skew that way. And so and there are whole areas and diversity that I haven't been particularly diligent about, and I'm trying to address that as I go along. But I think it is, if you are especially if you are a white male author and have that kind of cultural dominance at your back, I think it is something you do need to consciously do, because otherwise it's going to be that thing about it's like the lit author writing the book about the English professor having interesting encounters with young women. It becomes very wish fulfillment and all about you.
That's absolutely brilliant, Adrian. Very well put. I endorse everything you said. When I started trying to write science fiction, I felt that the writers that had really excited me in the sort of 60s and 70s were already doing interesting things with gender in their stories. So, writers like John Varley, who made a point of having lots of female protagonists in his stories and novels, and Joe Haldeman as well. So I didn't think it was. I thought it was a bit of a no-brainer, really, that if you're going to envisage a future, then there should be sort of equal opportunities for gender and race within that future. And it just seemed to make everything more interesting, anyway, as from a sort of imaginative perspective. Because, as you say, far too much science fiction that I consumed, particularly visual science fiction, was, as you say, it was just like white men with beards. Nothing wrong with beards, by the way. But there was that sense that it was it just holding up a mirror to itself, science fiction, and it could do so much more. But I think there were many writers who were going against the grain in previous years that I certainly took a lot from. It's a process of learning, and I'm hopefully open to seeing the flaws in my writing, seeing where there are areas of representation that I could have done a better job. Listening to people, trying not to sort of put my fingers in my ears when they tell me things that I might not like about the way I've handled gender or race in my stories, and just generally, hopefully, being on a process of understanding and improvement in my writing in the years to come. So it's a nice question. Hopefully, we can all do better with the way women in particular are represented within science fiction.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I've got all evening. My coffee's still good. Oh well, here's one which we can have a shot at. This is from Scott Firestone. Hi, Scott. Both of you have expressed admiration for Gene Wolfe. What is your favourite Wolfe work and why? The phenomenal Gene Wolfe. Yeah, appreciative from the writers here. Yeah.
He's definitely one of my favourite writers of all time. My favourite one of his, whilst I love Shadow of the Torture, The Book of the New Sun, and so forth, I think my absolute favourite is Soldier of the Mists, which is not one of his better known. It's a book about a soldier in ancient Greece who has had a head wound, so he's suffering day-to-day amnesia and is writing down everything that happens to him. And the book is his journal, and his journal includes meeting gods and monsters and magicians and so forth. And he himself, reading his journal later, does not know whether he told the truth back at the time he wrote the journal. And Wolfe is a masterful writer of the unreliable narrator at the best of times, and this is his just license to go completely crazy with a narrator that doesn't even know whether he's been reliable.
It's the four-dimensional chess of unreliable narrating. I read. I think, was it Soldier of Arret was one of that? Was it? And did he do a third one?
Soldier of Sidon is the third one.
I don't think I read all three of them. I think I maybe read the first two. Certainly read Soldier of the Mists. I came to Wolf via the Book of the New Sun, and it was a book I kept failing to get into. I kept borrowing it from the university library, and mainly because I liked the cover, and also because I believe it was mentioned in David Pringle's The 100 Best Science Fiction Novels, which was a book that came out in about 1985. That was really influential in shaping my headcanon about what was good science fiction. So thank you, David Pringle, for that wonderful book.
Yeah, I bounced off the Book of the New Sun really quite badly the first time I tried it, and then I mostly, I think, because I was about 13. I think I didn't have the reading maturity to understand what was going on.
No, I was probably about 23, and I still didn't have the reading maturity either. But it was one of those books where there was a sort of critical point where once I kind of got past that, it sort of clicked. And I think it was the bit where Severian, there's a wonderful bit fairly early on in it where he sees a picture of an Apollo astronaut, and we realise that we're actually in the very distant future. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go along with this now, and it just gets better and better. And I make a sort of vague ambition to reread the whole thing every 10 years, and I'm always finding levels in it that I didn't pick up on last time. So it's
the audiobook is very good if you're into audio.
Okay. I haven't tried that, no. Yeah. But then the other, I mean, on the back of that, then I went back to The Fifth Head of Cerberus, which is a sort of much more sort of straightforward, on its surface at least, piece of science fiction, and it's got robots in it. And I really love The Fifth Head of Cerberus, and there's bits of that all through Revenger, which nobody's picked up on. But I mean, just the texture of it was something that I absolutely fell in love with, and it sort of shaped my sort of whole approach to science fiction ever since. So Gene Wolfe, a wonderful writer, died a few years ago, but had a very distinguished long career, wrote many types of book. He was happy in any genre and moved beyond genre. He very hard to pigeonhole, but a very brilliant writer to dig into. To if you want to sort of lose yourself in the writings of one writer for a whole summer, Gene Wolfe is the man. Thank you for that question.
I'm just trying to scan through to see one that looks quick.
Yeah.
What do you reckon? Are there any of your novels you wish you could rewrite? No, there's a
yeah. Well, there's one where, I mean, are you interested in this? There's a nice question from Roman Stepanenko about software. What software do you use? What sort of, well,
that should be quick, shouldn't it? Yeah. Okay, yeah, let's do that one.
I use Microsoft Word 1997 because it works. Okay, that's why I use it. And I have a Dell a Dell computer in my office that has never been connected to the internet. It's coming up to 20 years old. It just does what I need to do it. It's pathetic, but that's what I am. I'm not a Luddite, but at the same time, I'm not deeply interested in software and computers. So I tend to just go for the path of least resistance. I mean, I'm using a much more advanced laptop here, but it is, in some respects, feels slower than the Dell, even though it's 20 years older.
I'm not constantly updating everything.
Yeah, and Word that it runs, the version of Word that it runs is full of applications and gadgets and things that I'll never need, but it makes it much more bloated and cumbersome when it loads. So yeah, I use Word and an old version of Word.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of envy you in that. I'm very much, I have the one machine, and so it's connected to the internet, and so I've got Office 365. But I mean, I'm also a Word user. I know a lot of writers do swear by Scrivener, and I think it just depends how your personal writing process works as to what's right for you. And there's no right answer about Windows or Mac or any of these things that people get into fights with.
Absolutely not. No.
How do you balance spell checking, reformatting sentences versus writing out the thoughts from your head? I guess I'm a fluid enough writer that I just write, and I will kind of edit on the fly, but usually I leave that to my own read through and second pass. And like I say, that I don't tend to need to make huge changes to the original draft?
No, I can write relatively clean prose without too many typographical errors or errors of punctuation or grammar and spelling. I mean, it's part of the trade of being a writer. That's not to devalue spell checkers, but they're very much the last step in the process for me. Yeah, so I just write and trust the fact that because I've been writing for 30 years, I know how to spell most words.
Also, we have editors.
Yeah, right. Yes, yeah.
I think that brings us up to pretty much exactly on time.
Should we take one more question because it's fun?
Yes, as long as it's a quick one, because I actually have a thing.
Okay, we'll just.
So what do we grab on this for you?
Okay, yeah.
So I've got. Do you have any plans for another space opera series?
That's from Lois A. Young. Hi, Lois. Yeah, you know what? I don't think I've ever done a space opera, so that's a kind of itch that I feel I have to, because I have a specific sense of what a space opera is, and it goes back to that thing Adrian and I were talking about at the beginning about anti-gravity and hyperdrive and fast and light travel. That to me is space opera. Dune is space opera. I would love to write something with the scope and scale of Dune. Have I got the artistic chops to do it? I don't know, but I would kind of like to fail. I'd like to try and fail. So yeah, I'd love to have a go at writing a genuine, no holds barred space opera at some point. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're supposed to give everyone a wave to show that we're done. But thank you everyone for turning up, and apologies for everyone whose questions we didn't get around to.
Yeah, thank you everyone. It's really been great fun. Thank you, Adrian, as well. Yeah, sorry we probably only scratched the surface of the questions. Thank you for all the comments that have been scrolling on the side, which I haven't been able to read because they're too far away. My laptop's too far away, but I really appreciate them. Thank you, everyone.